I think it was Harry Truman says the buck stops here, and I think they all know what that means when it comes to running cities, establishing budgets, and setting priorities. And we're going to make sure that we hear about their park priorities today. Issues around innovation, funding, partnerships, and maybe we'll get in some hot topics like dog walking. And before I introduce our mayor's panel, though, I'd like to thank Landscape Structures for their generous support of the Greater and Greener Conference and today's forum. They're a leader in playground manufacturing. Landscape Structures' mission is to enhance children's lives by fostering and creating inspiring play experiences while honoring the environment. Please welcome Pat Faust, President of Landscape Structures.
Thank you, Mark. We're proud to be a silver sponsor of Greater and Greener 2015. As this conference has brought together leading professionals, advocates, funders, and innovators to discuss something that is near and dear to our hearts at Landscape Structures: parks, green spaces, and communities. As the president of Landscape Structures, I've had the opportunity to meet with many professionals around the country and learn about what they're doing to create great communities. And I'm happy to report that, like you, they're using parks and playgrounds to improve the quality of life for their citizens. As champions for park and playgrounds, we know that these spaces help support the economy, public health, and environmental sustainability. By working with all of you, we've seen how building parks and playgrounds truly builds community. Individuals from all walks of life, all ages, all abilities, and all cultures come together in parks for exercise and recreation, celebration, community meetings, and more. Parks and playgrounds are a medium for friends, families, and neighbors to meet and connect. And with creative design incorporated into your park environments, that connection goes even further with the community. Well thought out design can turn your parks and playground into a space that teaches visitors about the history of your community, sends them on a seek and find adventure for local flora and fauna, or engages kids' imaginations with a one-of-a-kind playground design. Your meaningful designs deliver a sense of pride to community members. Now, I look forward to hearing from this group throughout the next few days and learning about the opportunities for today's urban parks. Even more, I'm excited to welcome you to our home state of Minnesota for Greater and Greener 2017. While you're in the Twin Cities, be sure to check out the amazing parks and playgrounds throughout the metro and connect with us to see our corporate headquarters just west of Minneapolis in Delano. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. It's now my pleasure to introduce my boss. If you wanted a resume to be a can-do mayor, you can't beat the one that we have. Mayor Lee graduated from the University of California Bolt Hall Law School. He then ran the Asian Law Caucus and then became executive director of our Human Rights Commission, followed by becoming director of purchasing for the city of San Francisco, then the director of our Department of Public Works. That culminated in 2005 by becoming our city administrator. When Mayor Gavin Newsom was elected as Lieutenant Governor of California in 2011, the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco unanimously appointed Ed as the acting mayor, and recognizing an opportunity to get a lot of good things done, he ran again for election and won overwhelmingly. It's my pleasure to introduce to you a park champion, Mayor Ed Lee.
Mark, thank you very much for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, welcome to the three-time World Series champion city, county, in San Francisco. I'm not dishing these mayors at all. I'm just welcoming you here. Sure. But anyway, I wanted to welcome all of you to San Francisco and to celebrate the Greater and Greener Parks and Open Space Conference here. It's a wonderful time in our city, and I love these conferences where both international, regional, and national intelligence and innovation and people that are getting things done all over our cities and all over parts of the country are coming together and evaluating how we can exchange ideas, exchange innovation, find out the latest and greatest, who's doing what in the public-private sector, who's doing what in the private sector, who's doing what in the public sector. And all of this is excitedly happening in our city. I want to give a special welcome to our three additional mayors, Mayor Price, Mayor White, and Mayor Murray, the mayor of my city that I grew up in Seattle. I just came back from celebrating my mother's 90th birthday back up in Seattle. And it was wonderful to see their parks system as well, growing as their city grows, as all of these cities are growing. This is a great time to have this conference here in San Francisco. I'm very proud to host it here and proud of our Rec and Park Department, our Commission, our Parks Alliance, our Trust for Public Lands, and all of our private partners who are working together with us to not only expand, to maintain, to reutilize, to refresh our open spaces in our city. Just this weekend, as you were here opening, we had Sunday Streets over in the Bayview. And it's exciting to always find out how people are celebrating those Sunday Streets. I know the other cities do that as well. And it isn't just enough for us as a city to have the parks that we do have. We've got to take over streets once in a while and make sure that those streets exhibit the kind of friendliness for at least a Sunday. To imagine and to have our kids and our families imagine how it is to play in open spaces without the challenges of our congested traffic. And you know, in our city, we are growing very rapidly. You see a lot of cranes as you've come in. There's a bit of congestion on our streets, just a bit. But we are growing, and we are growing at a pace where our unemployment rate is now 3.8%. Some of the analysts believe that that is close to zero. I'm not so sure I believe that, but I do say that that causes other challenges to happen in our city, and that's why I'm spending a lot of my time trying to build a goal of 30,000 new homes and rehabilitated homes by 2020. And we're making sure we do that with the public-private partnership. We're putting on a housing bond for San Francisco to the tune of $250 million. In a city like San Francisco, that might not be a whole lot of money, so we're going to complement that with a private venture with our foundations, philanthropists, and our banks to try to match that with private funds that could accelerate the building of this housing. You know, parks and open space are no different infrastructure necessities of a city than our transportation is, than our businesses, than our water sewer systems. All of this works to make our city successful. I've understood that through the many roles that I've had, that I've been able to play in San Francisco, but I know full well that if you've got a good infrastructure and have parks at the center of that, you know you're going to take care of a lot of families. And with our parks, it's not just the physical aspects of it. As challenging as it may be, it is also how you program those parks, how you engage the parents and the families and the school districts and all the neighbors into making sure those parks represent activities that could also take care of a lot of health challenges, as well as be links to education, links to sports, links to after-school programs, links to senior programs that are utmost necessity for a growing city. It is also, of course, critical to our young people. Well, today, San Francisco boasts over 220 parks. We have 180 playgrounds. 6 golf courses. I played all 6 of them, 3 times each. 38 community gardens and growing. And when, in fact, I think not unlike all the other cities, our urban parks, our urban gardens are growing at a very rapid pace. People want to be able to grow their own foods and flowers and be able to see that blossoming. And we have a lot of philanthropy that is beginning to identify that as the next great space, if you will, for investment. And I don't know if you knew this, but although we're only 49 square miles, 15% of our city is open space. They, of course, reflect such iconic names as Golden Gate Park, Creasy Field, and of course tonight, if you visit Coit Tower, it'll be laden in orange for a very good reason. 98% of our city lives within a 10-minute walk of a park. 98%. We are going to get to 100%. Aren't we, Phil? Mark, we're going to get to 100%, and we're going to commit to that in a very short space. We have over $370 million in parks bonds to spend. Just this year, we'll be spending $15.5 million to go towards rehabilitating and refreshing some 6 playgrounds in San Francisco. It is true that the private, the philanthropic, the city government, the state, and the regional partnerships are very strong in our parks. And that collaboration is absolutely essential, not just for the maintenance of these parks and the refreshing, it's for the engagement of how these parks will look and are maintained. And I was most excited when recently, in the middle of the most impoverished area of our city, called the Tenderloin area, we have a $9.3 million investment, just reopened Bodecker Park, with a strong collaboration. In fact, I think it was a year and a half of planning and meetings with neighborhood organizations, people who use the parks, parents, kids, public and private school children and their parents engaged with our recreation and park and our supervisors over the quality of that park and what it meant. And what it did mean ultimately is a $9.3 million investment. And when you look at the sources of that, it was the state parks that invested in it. It was our own recreation and park and our own park bonds. It was grants from the philanthropic foundations, all that amassed in this investment. And it's come out with one of the best designed urban parks where you have a 24/7 ability in the clubhouse. You've got a basketball court. You got homegrown flowers and the reuse of water treatment there and artificial turf so that more and more use can be had. But that was a great investment, and I invite you to, if you have time, to take a look at that park as our best example, most recent example of this entire collaboration. Well, these kinds of investments in our parks really help our city become more successful, more inviting, and more inclusive. Parks are just like transportation and just like education. They're the great equalizers in cities that sometimes are becoming more and more reflections of inequality. Our parks have become at the center of the effort to equalize things. And with the philanthropy that we're proposing, along with the city investments, we can take care of a lot of families and low-income families to participate more and more in the great programs. I'll have much more to say to that when we interact at the panel. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you from the great state of Texas, a mayor that is a mayor in a very fast-growing city, the city of Fort Worth. She's the co-chair of the Mayors for Parks Coalition and a great parks champion herself. Let me introduce to you Mayor Betsy Price, the true champion of parks. And my question for her is it Fort Worth or Fitworth, Texas?
It's a Fitworth, Texas.
All right. Mayor Price.
Thank you. First, I think that we ought to take a minute and thank Mayor Lee and his team for this conference. They've done an incredible job. We had the opportunity this morning to get out and walk, and I will tell you what, Fort Worth is very flat compared to San Francisco. I'm a cyclist by nature, and someone recently said, "You're a biker." I said, "No, I'm not a biker, I'm a cyclist. The difference is I wear spandex, not leather." And I would hate to cycle here. I don't know. The hills we call challenging are about like that. But it's great to be with you. Fort Worth is a rapidly growing city. We're a population of 792,000, 17th largest city in the nation. And with that, like your cities, we face major challenges. We add 65 new residents a day. We must be doing something right. The anticipation is we'll be 1 million people and still growing. Fort Worth is fortunate in our parks program. We have a lot of parks. We're a city of 352 square miles with another 350 miles of ETJ that will be annexed. Our population has dramatically changed just the last 4 to 5 years, and that has changed how we look at our parks. Our population has gone much younger. We're now an average age of 35. We were voted the best place in the nation for young millennials to find a job recently. But we also have a huge diversion of senior citizens, that silver tsunami that's coming, guys, at all of us. And we have to figure out, how do we program what they need? And I'm one of them. How do we engage them? How do we get there? For us at the city, parks are an incredible asset because they bring that extra tool. Engaged cities are always more resilient, stronger, more vibrant, and definitely more outspoken, which as an elected official is what you want. And for economic development, the ability to increase the health of our community is directly tied to our parks programs. He mentioned Fit Worth. 4 years ago, or 3.5 years ago, we started a program called Fit Worth to engage our kids because we were so worried about the growing epidemic of obesity, but to engage their families too. And they have to track their eating, their exercise, their water intake, and their sleep. And they have to get their parents to commit. And the first year alone, 25,000 children joined us in the effort. And in 2.5 years, we have had a 4% reduction in the obesity rate among the children who are participating. And our parks are a big piece of that. They serve as an easy way for us to get people engaged. We're in the middle of a $1 billion river project to reclaim our river and to open it up. And last year we started an issue called Rocking the River. And the Trinity used to be pretty much look like a drainage ditch. It's a southern river, remember, a very warm river, not like yours. But people get in it and they float on the tubes. And last year alone, 300,000 people joined us on the river for a day of exercise, a day of music, and a chance to get out. We passed a $290 million bond election recently. We started out talking about our bond elections because of our growth and who we are and the rapid growth. We desperately need transportation infrastructure. And we started out with very little in parks, about $12 million in parks. And our citizens told us as we went to see them, they wanted that changed. They were willing to sacrifice their transportation to have more parks for their family, particularly inner city parks. So we reduced it and raised our parks, reduced transportation, and they overwhelmingly passed the proposition for parks by 79.9% for $40 million in parks. If citizens aren't telling us they want parks, I don't know what that is. And Fort Worth is now in the midst of a 5-year Blue Zones program. And Blue Zones will engage all of our citizens in improving their health. So we're looking forward to what we can do. We've leveraged our public-private partnerships to make those, your precious dollars, go a little bit further, and I think we're going to talk about that more. But thank you for being interested in the health of your citizens and the health of our nation as a whole.
Hang on 1 minute here, and I'm going to get the resume out of our next speaker and introduce him.
Must be lengthy.
I had a chance to meet Mayor Murray from Seattle before the show started. He'd been in the state legislature for a long time, and I asked him, I said, how did he like being mayor? And he lit up. So I said, I guess that means you're going to run for re-election the next time. He said, and the next time, and the next time. So he's having a good time. And I will tell you a little bit about him, and then we'll get him up here to say a few words. He's been the mayor of Seattle since January 2014. He served in the Washington State Senate from 2007 to 2013, and before that, for 11 years in the Washington State House of Representatives. So he's been around a while. He's got some innovative programs that he started to institute, and I'll let him talk about them, but we're interested in hear how Seattle approached all this. Mayor Murray.
Thanks very much. Well, it is good to be here from the land of Seahawks in San Francisco. Mayor Lee started it. It was just after the election, just over 15 months ago, we had an issue we had to face in our family. I'm married to somebody who works for the Seattle Parks Department, and the question came up about whether we could both work for the city of Seattle. And my husband, Michael, turned to me and said, well, it's going to be my career before yours. So, I want to introduce to you somebody who is an incredible, committed person to our public parks and is the first gentleman of the city of Seattle, Michael Shiozaki. Where are you, Michael? And on a serious note, Mayor Lee, thank you for your hospitality and for the city of San Francisco. Without the history of this city, I wouldn't be standing here today, so thank you. So Seattle Parks, founded, created by the Olmsteads in 2003 to basically do two things that represent Seattle and the values of the city of Seattle. To represent the beautiful natural environment of the city, the reason that those of us who were born there stay and the reason that people move there. Secondly, as Mayor Lee referenced, these are the great places of democracy. These are the places where people come together. As a kid, growing up in a family of 7 kids in a working class neighborhood, West Seattle then was a working class neighborhood, you don't go on vacations when you come from a family of 7 kids. Actually, you don't even go to restaurants with that many kids. So parks become the opportunity to experience the out-of-doors. It was Alki Beach, it was Lincoln Park, it was Schmidt Park, where my siblings and I played, where we had picnics and could eat out. And today, that's more important than ever in Seattle. And as we've taken an approach to our park system, it's those two values that we have tried to move forward on. We were the fastest growing city in America. Amazon is building out in the center of our city for 71,000 employees. Expedia announced last week they're moving into downtown Seattle. This is an incredible period in Seattle's history as we grow. But it has made the issue of inequality even greater than it was before. And that's where the park system and our community centers come in play. Not just for our young people, but for our seniors as well. We have 465 parks. We have 26 community centers, and in a city of, since we're all talking about the size of the city, which is interesting, so in a city of 89 square miles, 564 acres of parks and open space. So we faced a challenge. If you're from the West Coast, you'll understand this. We've had a series of statewide initiatives that have degraded our ability to finance city services because of a shrinking tax structure. And my predecessors, beginning in 1999, responded to that with a series of levies, and the citizens voted for those, both for maintenance and for the expansion of open space in the city. The problem with levies is they're only 6 years, and the problems with levies is they're not ongoing sources of revenue. And what we were facing was a growing system where the maintenance and the programming was significantly behind. We had about $300 million in maintenance backlog, over 300 projects throughout our park system when I became mayor. There was a discussion going on in the city, how should we approach this? One of the ways to do it was to continue to do levies every 6 years, and that would have been easy, and I believe it would have been passed. The other way to do it was to create a permanent revenue source. That was a little more controversial. In a city like Seattle and a lot of West Coast cities, the internal politics don't look like the nation. It's sort of the left suspicious of government, and in this case, it was part of the population suspicious of how we would spend the money if they didn't get to approve it every 6 years. But we won the argument that actually we can have citizen participation and establish a steady revenue stream so that we can plan for parks over the long run. So right now, $50 million every year forever, and or unless things change and the voters do away with it, will come into the Seattle park system, allowing us to stabilize programming for our community centers, allowing us to do the maintenance and the activation of our parks that we need, and allowing us to enter into innovative programs with the private sector in activating park spaces, particularly in our downtown core, which is somewhat challenged. So it's a great thing. But it comes back to a city that's growing very rapidly, an economy that is expanding very rapidly, but a city that has to get growth right. And the city of Seattle not only said yes to parks last year, it kind of scared me. We did 3 ballot measures. They also said yes to new taxes for the largest increase in bus service, and for the first time in Seattle, new taxes to start pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds. So I think my city's getting it. Thank you.
I'm looking forward to the Q&A and the discussion, because I think funding and how we do it is probably one of the most important issues facing cities and parks in particular. Now, though, let me introduce to you Knox White. He's an attorney, his native Greenville, South Carolina, who has served as the city's 34th and current mayor, get this, since December 11th, 1995. A longer tenure than any other mayor of Greenville. Previously, he was from 1983 to 1993, the at-large member of the Greenville City Council. He goes up for re-election again this November, and I assume he'll win it again. Mayor Knox White.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I didn't know I was going to get into my political history. You're not supposed to talk about that. We're not really politicians, you know. It is great to be here and have a chance to share with you something I think you'll find very exciting. If anyone doubts about the transformative power of parks and what it can do to a city, I've got a great story to tell you about. First of all, Greenville, South Carolina, to get your geography, now that I'm on the West Coast, is located halfway between Atlanta and Charlotte. Very high growth area, a lot of foreign investment, BMW, Michelin, and the like. The economy's changed drastically over the last several years. And we began a task some years ago of not just transforming or reinventing the local economy, but also reinventing the downtown. And after about 15, 20 years at it, we've pretty much done that. We have a great downtown now. It's totally walkable, pedestrian friendly. It's got all the amenities of mixed use, lots of residential, lots of retail and office. It's got people on the street. It's got all the things you want. But about 8 or 9 years ago, we really had some serious thinking about doing all that just wasn't enough. There's still something missing. You still want a city to be a place that people have a real heart for. It's authentic and unique, a place people might want to go back to again and again. And what might that be? And that brings you around to parks and green space. Now, we had an asset that, believe it or not, was pretty well overlooked. We had a river. We have a river called the Reedy River, small river running through the city. And we also have something pretty remarkable, and I think the picture's up there prematurely, but oh well. See it up there? We have a waterfall. Believe it or not, a 40-foot natural waterfall that's only a few yards from Main Street. Now, the story goes like this. The river was once the mainstay of the community, the real centerpiece of the community in the 19th century. But during the 20th century, with industrialization, the river became polluted. So it's the same story that so many American cities know. So the river becomes polluted. The city turns its back on the river, forgets about it. In our case, turns its back on the waterfall. And then, believe it or not, sort of the ultimate disgrace, in 1960, the State Highway Department put this on top of it. A 4-lane highway bridge on what once was the birthplace of the community, by the way. Well, over time in the 1980s, the water became less polluted and cleaner, and we began to talk about the possibility of reclaiming the falls. Now, it was a very tough sell because when this bridge went up, that was 1960, that meant for 40 years, people who lived in Greenville all their lives didn't even remember we had a waterfall. We lost the entire institutional memory that the falls even existed, the falls that was once the centerpiece of the city. So it was a very tough sell. Over a course of time, we basically were saying to people, we propose to spend $13 million to build a beautiful park and public garden around a waterfall you've never seen. Trust us. And they didn't. Mr. Mayor, I waited until I was reelected to take on this task. Honestly. Well, the campaign worked itself out over about a year and a half. There was a lot of political controversy. It was a tough sell because people honestly didn't know the waterfall was there. Well, we were able to remove the bridge, and I have the next picture, and created Falls Park. And well, thank you. You only see a slice of it here, but there's a beautiful pedestrian suspension bridge where there was once a 4-lane highway. There's about 20 acres of the park. It's a lush garden. And what you don't see in this picture also, you do see people there, and people enjoy it all the time. It's really given heart to the community. It indeed is once again the centerpiece. But what you don't also see in this picture, again, just a few yards from Main Street, is we spent $13 million on the park. Within a year and a half, we had $180 million in private invested 1 block away from this park. Hotels. We had hotels, condominiums, apartments, residential retail, office development, all 2 or 3 block area. Totally transformed the economy of this end, this very neglected end of Main Street that is now the centerpiece. We also had launched from this section is 18 miles of bike and walking paths that emanate from the waterfall, 18 miles upriver and about 5 miles the other direction. We have something we never had in our community. We have tourism now. A huge tourism trade as people from the greater Atlanta area now come to enjoy our restaurants and the downtown scene and, of course, the park. The amenities have just been coming new ones all the time. So economic development, tourism, a governor's school for the arts located nearby, but mainly, most of all, it's something of tremendous pride for people in the community. Indeed, it's kind of the identity of the city now. It's now the centerpiece of our city, as it was 100 years ago. Not bad for a park. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, I want you to know that that wasn't too bad for 4 elected officials who were given 2 to 5 minutes each. That's a record right there.
It's an important subject we're talking about.
We have rules.
Mayor Price, I'm not going to go up against you. You've done some pretty amazing things, as have all these mayors. But I want to chat about kind of the elephant in the room when it comes to parks and public perceptions, and that is funding. Mayor Murray, recently you joined Chicago and Minneapolis in doing independent funding for your park system, which seems like a pretty bold move. Could you talk about the debate around that issue?
Sure. And again, the independent funding is it's not an independent district. It is still the mayor is strong mayor system, so I still run the park system. The council still the council, but it's a construct in state law that allows us to do something outside our general fund. And again, the controversy, the center of this controversy was, could we be trusted? Could we be trusted to make the right decision? Would we just, if we just were given a blank check, as what our opponents called it, we would misspend the money, the parks wouldn't improve, which is, for me, was fascinating. Having been a legislator in Seattle, a very liberal city, where the same constituents would beat me up for not raising taxes over the long run, I was in the same city and people were beating me up for trying to raise taxes over the long run. It's a difference in local government. The key moment after the election, I met with the citizens group that was looking at doing the Parks District, this funding source, as it's called, and they were pretty much undecided and probably leaning against it. And this was the first opportunity for me to learn what it was like to be mayor. And I said, well, I'm going to put this on the table. If you don't come out with a recommendation, I'm going to respect that. But I'm going to put it on the table because I think we need to have this discussion. They went back, they rethought it, they recommended it to the council. The council passed it. Again, there was this huge fear that somehow bureaucrats were getting the money. We have a parks board that is appointed by the mayor, confirmed by the council. We have an oversight group of citizens in addition to that review the expenditure plan for this new revenue source. So that's how we reached the compromise. We want it at about 55%.
Great. I might get other mayors' opinions about the funding of your parks, and is this something that would be attractive to the rest of you?
I don't think that that's a mechanism that we'll do in Fort Worth. We've been very blessed. Ours are funded in several different streams. As most of you know, Fort Worth was at the heart of the Barnett Shale drilling, first of the urban drilling. And whether you're a drilling fan or not, the urban drilling, the fracking, brought millions of dollars in. And while we never allow drilling in our parks, a lot of the gas is gathered from under the parklands through off-site fracking, and that money goes into an endowment and trust that has generated millions of dollars that we can use for our parks. And then the other piece that we've leveraged significantly, very successful, is public-private partnerships. We have incredibly generous citizens who love their parks, and just recently we accepted a $3.1 million grant to redo our rock garden and our botanic gardens from a family whose parents have been in Fort Worth forever. And then we took an 80-year-old golf course that had definitely seen better days. You know how those old golf courses are. Couldn't be rehabbed at a cost that wasn't being played. And we've turned it into a community park and a dog park. And one of our families raised almost $1 million for the part of that park, but the city matches it. And then the state of Texas has some step grants that we match. But just as importantly, and Catherine will appreciate this, we've leveraged the Land and Water Conservation Fund, matching our dollars significantly, and I'm co-chair of the Mayors for Parks, so that fund will be funded. It's due to sunset this year. If your mayors are not a member of that, there are 40 of us currently who are members. Encourage them to join. It's critical that this fund be refunded because all of us have land and water conservation parks. The other tool that we use on parks is a new development going in. I mentioned earlier that we're a very sprawled out city, good or bad, we just are, and growing. But our developers have to dedicate 3 acres of parkland for every 1,000 population. And many of those, they have to also dedicate a certain amount of money to keep the park up and to help us program it.
We'd kill for 3 acres in San Francisco. I just want you to know.
Well, Mark, I actually had a question for Mayor Murray. It sounds like you didn't have to go to the voters to change that stream of revenue.
No, we did. It went to the ballot in last August.
Last August.
And won by 55%.
55%. And how long did it take you to have that conversation so you felt more comfortable in presenting this to the voters?
I sent the recommendation in January. I think the council sent it to the ballot in May, and it passed in August. So over basically an 8-month period of time.
Had it ever been looked at before?
Not in the city of Seattle. It had in other cities and is used by other
not for
cities in
y'all.
the state. Yeah. Great.
I asked that because we have started the conversation here with our Parks Alliance about a more steady stream of revenue for our parks. We've had great success in the 4-year anniversary of our parks bonds, and we've done very well in the parks bonds. And those bonds have produced very high quality parks, and I think this is where I think the building of the public trust has happened, because everybody watches what you have done in the past to complete all these projects. And then when you do invite, and as I know Mayor Price has talked about, when you do invite philanthropy, their first thing is, how do I hold you accountable?
That's correct.
Because
That's
if we're putting money in from the private sector, accountability is all about delivering on those results. And we've done very, very well in restoring, in reinvigorating that private thing so that we can have this conversation. One of my concerns, of course, is the same concern as how are we trusted with this ongoing stream, and whether or not it requires an update constantly as our parks bonds do. But we're open to that discussion, I think. But I will say this, is that people will look at that today precisely because we are a very strong, economically strong city. They wouldn't look at that stream if our values of our land were up and down, up and down. And so whatever we end up doing is going to require that we continue to be an economically strong city. If we falter on that, it doesn't matter what stream you have, it's going to go down, whether it's land prices or the value of housing in San Francisco.
I was sitting through some of the workshops, and a lot of discussion was about money and budgets, and that's always the concern. But, you know, one thing all we mayors do is we look at the city holistically, and this is a great conference on parks, and it's great to see families and things people enjoy. But we sometimes go to conferences on things like water and sewer. Oh my gosh. Yes, there are such conferences, and you know, those are real needs, but they don't have the nice pictures of the families and things like that. They don't. They really do meet and talk about these things, just like this, and they can't talk about public-private partnerships. That's not even in their vocabulary. They can't talk about tourism dollars and how those can be directed. They can't talk about, again, raising the grants and opportunities for grants. We have that in common, I guess, but there's fewer of those for them too. But the point is, I think there's great reason for optimism. The creativity that you hear coming out of everybody in terms of where the money might be and where the opportunities, it sure beats a lot of other programs and other needs out there. So I would just say, you know, be of good cheer about it. It's always tough out there, but the opportunities are far greater because we have a product that people can see, touch, and feel and enjoy. There is a constituency. And every now and then across the country, people do hold referendums, and guess what? To everyone's surprise, that'll pass. The sewer bill goes down in defeat, but the parks bill is approved. Happens a lot.
And parks are one of those things that bring in economic development, like your waterfall park. Our River Vision Park is bringing an estimated $10 billion in investment in that'll follow it. And so it's a fairly easy sell. Like you said, sewer and water, stormwater are not always.
Never saw those.
They just don't see where that goes.
I think we said earlier too, and I think we all agree that parks have been a great equalizer for the inequalities that sometimes are reflected in fast-growing cities. And we've been able to harness over 10,000 scholarships in the past year for kids that wouldn't afford these particular programs, like some of the summer programs. We've been able to raise that money. And I think one of the conversations is that we need to continue making sure that we have that robust play intact because of, I think, all of the benefits that we've identified.
one of the implications of all this, I know in San Francisco, one, I'm proud to say we get 72% support on our bonds, which is really terrific, and it shows the faith in the mayor and the leadership of the city and our department. But in our case, we build up, we can't build out. And so there's a lot of multifamily housing, and parks are the backyards for those people. But Texas, it sounds like you're going out rather than up.
Well, no, we're not. I mean, we've been big for some time, and our push now, our strongest push right now is to return people to our inner city. Our urban villages have really taken hold and are growing. We did an open streets project just this past weekend on Main Street. We have a brand new plaza, a piazza in downtown that is just phenomenal, and people are really coming back. And 10 years ago, we probably had less than 500 people living in the downtown itself, and now there's 8,000 just in downtown. But all our inner city urban villages, that's our real thrust, is how do we revitalize that? And one of the biggest draws is the parks and the pools. We had a 40-year-old, 50-year-old historic swimming pool that they closed 5 years ago before I was elected, and one of the campaign promises was to get that reopened. And one of our big families, philanthropic families, came to me and said, I grew up swimming there, I'll help you reopen that if you will agree to the operating expenses. And we put it in the budget in perpetuity because he gave us $500,000 to redo the pool.
That's nice.
And we matched it with a $350,000. So we are really focused on our inner city parks. Our developers are taking care of those new parks that are on the out, but we've got to grow the inside of the city.
When you ask a developer to put in a certain amount of open space as part of the plan, do they also oblige themselves to perpetual maintenance of that open space?
Many of them do. Probably 50% of them take up the maintenance of that open space. The other 25%, the homeowners associations do it, and then the other 25% of that, the city, that's donated to the city, and more often than not, the developers will donate some funds with that if we're going to take it on.
Thank you. And I know that there's a greater Greenville fund in your territory, Mayor White. Is that an asset that helps you in all aspects of parks, or do they focus on any particular area?
Well, most of our major parks, including Falls Park, came with an endowment. It was easy to get the private sector to see the vision of the park, be excited about it, and want to buy into it. So we use an endowment, and that's for extra maintenance for the park. You know, one thing about parks, too, is that they're changing. I mean, I don't think 10 years ago anybody had a dog park, right? 10 years ago? And now people want a dog park. We're getting a lot of density downtown with lots and lots of high-rise residential. And I think it seems to be a requirement that if you live in high-rise residential, you must own 2 dogs. and so, but you have other, politically speaking, you have other neighborhoods in the city when you talk about a dog park and they look at you like, are you crazy? So that's an emerging kind of thing that we all have to deal with now. But in an urban area, they want a place to.
You brought it up, so I'm going to pursue it.
It just popped in my head.
In San Francisco, it's a very contentious issue, on-leash and off-leash dogs and dog parks. And because we have a national park that's part of our urban scenery, they have a whole set of rules unto themselves. And so I would venture to say our most contentious meetings relate to dogs, believe it or not. And I'm curious if, how's Seattle in that territory?
It's true everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, the role of dogs in parks is a very contentious issue.
Well, now,
Next to feral cats. We just had a very contentious over feral cats.
So now you
in
all,
the parks, too.
You all are mayors. I want to hear solutions now. What's the, where do we go with this? I mean, it really is an interesting challenge for everybody.
That's why we run for this job.
But we actually have a more contentious issue. We're about to, I propose eliminating smoking in parks. But we are a state that legalized marijuana, so this is a very interesting issue.
You know, our solution on the dogs has been, and like y'all, we've all got 2 dogs or more. I think it's just mandatory in Fort Worth that everybody's got 2 or more. And, you know, when you've got children, you've also got grand dogs. So more often than not, most of them have more than 2, including us. But, you know, the dogs, we have areas, we have 2 dog parks and another one coming in that are wildly successful in the inner city, and then in the outer areas, in the suburban areas, they tend to have areas that are designated walk your dog on a leash, or you can have them open, off leash, but they have to behave, and the first time they're cited by another neighbor. And the feral cat population, I'm not kidding, in the parks was a significant issue. And we have a trap, spay, and neuter program, and then we return them back to the park if someone takes over that colony. And the way you know if they've been handled by the city and trapped and spayed and neuters is we clip their ear. And then they go back, and the people who feed them and love them get the chance to take their colony back. But it was extremely contentious over feral cats.
So I don't think that's been one of our problems, has it, Mayor?
No,
We have some feral other stuff, but not feral cats.
we have feral trashers. Yeah, maintenance costs, of course, in urban settings are much higher, I think, and that's what we're challenged with is when we do invite a lot of people to come to our city, and they do, and it's popular as we are, our urban parks are highly and intensely used, and so a higher level of maintenance is one of those challenges. I also think that for both new and established parks, water, of course, in California, a huge, huge challenge, and we are about to embark on a very expensive but absolutely needed reuse water connection between our treatment plants and Golden Gate Park. That's going to be in the millions of dollars, but it's worth it in the long run given our water drought challenges. But maintenance is one of the major discussions we're having now because of the intense use of our parks.
Yeah, we get in the same thing on maintenance. In the summer when it's 110 in Fort Worth and dry, do we mow it and do we not mow it? We get fussed at for mowing when they're just mowing dirt, and then we get fussed at if we're not mowing. But that's, you know, it's an expensive proposition to manage them.
It is. I note that we literally have 4 minutes left. I'm wondering if giving each mayor an opportunity for a minute to talk about just what message you'd like to give these folks out here that are day to day trying to make parks work and trying to build parks, give some closing thoughts. And maybe Mayor White, we could ask you to.
Well, I think the best thing you can do for parks, especially when dealing with people in the private sector or the public sector who have the funding, is to take people to the park. One of the problems we have in smaller neighborhood parks that don't have a wide constituency for it because they're not as well known, and perhaps they're in lower income neighborhoods, you literally need to take people on the bus and drive them over there and introduce them to it. I think the kind of people who enjoy parks, the kind of people who support the grand park in your city are really already predisposed to support a smaller park in a community if they're given the chance to be introduced to it. You know, whether it's the fact they don't have adequate bathrooms or the maintenance is not kept up. I think they're, again, getting back to a more optimistic message, I think there's people out there who have a real heart for it and are willing to help in a sense that's broader than, again, the big park. But you have to show it to them. And there's nothing like taking the mayor in person, letting them meet the kids in the neighborhood, meet the people who are using it. They'll get the message. They tend to be the ones who call you back a month later and say, hey, I want to help.
Thank you. Mayor Murray.
Well, thank you again for having me here today. I would close by saying that some of the things that we're about to do in Seattle with public-private partnerships are going to be very, very important, and they can add value. And we know, look at New York City, we know how good those relationships can be. But when it comes to keeping programs going and maintaining our parks so that they can operate, not having a dedicated, steady source of income that is from the public sector means that when times get bad, and times will get bad again, at least in a city like ours where they're pretty good right now, parks will suffer. They'll be one of the first places to suffer, and the programming in those parks will suffer. So this is an opportunity, I think, for us in America to talk about how we maintain those parks and how we maintain those programs over the long run.
Thank you. Mayor Price.
Well, thank you all for what you do. You really are at the heart and soul of the parks and of the nation. And parks are that critical element that bring to the public, to the communities, the health, the vitality, the resilience. People want to come. They need to be outside. Children need to be outside. It's very cyclic, and with that comes economic development. The more parks, the better your parks are, the more likely you are to attract better businesses and the type of business that you want. But I would tell you one thing I think that you can do is tell your elected officials what you see in your park. Tell them what's going on in your park. Tell them how they can make your parks better. We're all in big cities and busy cities, and we're not always in the parks. We're in them as much as we can be. But you as park experts and officials can tell us what you think, and that's a huge help for any elected official to hear from the people who are on the front line.
Thank you. And last but not least, Mayor Lee.
Well, I'm glad again for Greater and Greener Conference to be here in San Francisco. It is extremely interesting time, very positive time for ideas, for making the right investment choices. And if I've learned anything in the past few years, parks and open spaces have become an economic driver for our tourism city. And you can see the numbers, millions and millions of dollars come into the city because we maintain and create open spaces and parks and maintain historic, iconic ones that we already have that have been the signature for many, many generations. It's a very interesting conversation we're having about steady stream of revenue that has to be matched by the philanthropic dollars, and I'm excited to see philanthropy as part of that, because that's also voters and people who are interested in high quality parks. When you have over 33 parks in the city now Wi-Fi'd up from the private sector, because of the generosity of Google and San Francisco innovation technology companies coming together to fund those, you know you've got people that are really invested in the quality of this. And so it's a great time to have this conversation, because ultimately I think that people want that steady stream, but they also want the philanthropy. They understand the role from health to education to tourism, to just the quality of life, and the role of parks being at the center, I think, of our infrastructure and our quality of what we want the city to be. So I'm glad to not only host this, but to take from this ideas with the Parks Alliance and Trust for Public Land and our Recreation and Park Department to go forward and see whether we can get to 100% of 10-minute walks to a park for everyone in our city.
Thank you, Mayor. Please join me in thanking all these mayors.
Thank you all.